Welcome to another episode of Real Estate Investing Explained. Here's today's question. We started briefly talking about it earlier, and I don't want to necessarily get too deep into a morbid subject, but I've heard people recommend that long-term investors should just continually do 1031 exchanges until they pass away as a strategy for building multi-generational wealth, since they wouldn't be paying taxes on that money their whole lives if it's done correctly. Because of this, I'm guessing there's no limit on the number of 1031 exchanges that can be completed by a single person. Is that correct? And if so, what impact does this have on the people that ultimately inherit the properties?
So, this is what's called swap till you drop, and it's a very popular method for creating multi-generational wealth. The reason why it's called multi-generation is because the true benefits are going to be enjoyed by the next generation, and you will experience that tremendous joy and pleasure of knowing you've taken care of your children. Essentially, the swap till you drop is going to be beneficial because at the current tax law, an individual, the investor, at the point of his death, all of his properties and all his assets go on to a step-up basis, right? So at the time, value at the time of his death, not the previous sale, the value at the time of his death. So essentially, that step-up basis is really crucial because it's going to eliminate the taxes that were going to be owned on capital gains. It's going to eliminate the depreciation recapture. Right? All those challenges, all those taxes will be not just deferred, but eliminated. Now, you do need to be aware of the estate tax, of course, that the inheritors will have to deal with. But at the same time, it's an amazing tool for building multi-generational wealth because you're giving your children an asset that's going to be tax-free.
Yeah, and on estate taxes, right now, the thresholds for paying estate taxes, really only the top echelon of wealth is tax on estates, has an estate tax. We don't worry too much currently about estate taxes, but it is something to keep an eye on. Future administrations and Congresses may lower those limits, and estate taxes could again become a problem. You'd rather pay capital gain taxes, quite frankly, than estate taxes because the rates are much higher. But swapping till you drop is something investors do. Just to answer your question, there is no limit to how many exchanges an investor can do during their lifetime. That being said, you should hold your properties for investment rather than resale. So 1031 exchanges are not designed for people who are flipping short term. And typically, by short term, I mean probably anything under a year would be subject to scrutiny. So it's really for your longer term holds for 2 to 5 and on years, more so than somebody's going to just be in and out of properties constantly.
Alex, you mentioned that step up value, and I think that's like the key point to this swap till you drop opportunity or dynamic. And so I want to make sure that we really drill this home because I think a lot of this is new to the audience listening. So I want to make sure that we fully cover that and make sure we fully understand what that means. And so if I understand you correctly, the step up means that if the property was purchased for say $100,000 and they were going to sell it in the future for say $400,000, they might have a $300,000 gain. Whereas now that step up value and that person passes away, rather than their original purchase price being $100,000, their quote unquote purchase price now becomes $400,000, and that value is stepped up to the value of the property at the time they passed. Is that correct?
I think you said exactly correct. Essentially, and we're talking about 1031 exchange clients is typically, if you're looking to defer, capital gains of more than $100,000 at least, we're not talking, and person has been doing 1031s again. So we're talking about a person could have potentially had a home that they purchased in San Francisco in the 1970s for $150,000, sold it $2 million, leveraged it to move to Kansas City for $4 million. You're talking about going from $100,000 to $4 million. So we're talking about very significant. So $100,000 to $4 million, the capital gains tax you'd be paying on $3.9 million. And if an individual passed away, the value of that home, when in terms of taxation, would actually be $4 million. So no capital gains tax.
Yeah, and just the accounting term for your initial investment in the property is called your cost basis. And that's what gets stepped up. So your cost basis gets stepped up to the fair market value at the date of your death, so that any capital gain to that point disappears. Now, if your kids wait 10 years and then they sell the property, there'll be additional gain that might be taxed. But the capital gain that accumulated during your lifetime, that disappears on them.
That's a good point that you just brought up. So that's assuming that it's sold right at the death, because if it's held after, their cost basis is still stepped up to what it was when the person passed, but now the gain is probably smaller.
He could be going from that $4 million to maybe $4,100,000. So, but it's just a line in the day, but that difference is so huge. People should really be aware of this. And for the individual who is kind of reaching the point where they're thinking multi-generationally, they can still, of course, use those properties for rental income. So they're living off the rental income. And at the same time, but knowing that they are going to leave an asset to their children. And that's a really, really beautiful idea.
That's all for this episode of Real Estate Investing Explained. Be sure to follow me on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook, or subscribe to our YouTube channel to get even more free content.